All right, good afternoon. This is Ernest, and I wanted to try something a little different. Um, I've been posting updates on LinkedIn of the progress that I'm making with the Shiphandl mobile game that I've been working on for quite a while now. And I want to kind of make a video about my workflow, just to kind of demonstrate to anyone interested in using Unity 3D or programming with C Sharp, just some of the workflow challenges that I run into. So yeah, I hope this recording is useful to anyone out there that's trying to be an indie developer. So starting fresh, I'm going to launch everything. You're going to see me work on a problem that how I would normally tackle it. So my methodology, programming paradigms that I might use. So just so hey, I'm just a guy alone and unafraid trying to reach an end goal here. So without further ado, I'll start, and I'm just going to launch Unity. So for those of you watching this, maybe you have some familiarity with different types of game engines, whether it be Unreal Engine or Unity 3D. I've decided for years now to stick with Unity. I just like the language, so C Sharp is the primary language. The Unity engine itself is running on C++, but I find C Sharp to be a little bit more user-friendly, so I enjoy using it. And then, of course, you have Unreal Engine that uses its own type of visual scripting. But I won't get into that. I'll just stick with what I know. So I'm going to launch the Shiphandl application, or the Unity editor, where I have Shiphandl saved in a repository. And I could be doing things completely wrong, but it works. It works for me. And what I do, I have a repository, and there's a master branch, of course. Whenever I make changes to the project, I tend to create a separate branch to create improvements or take things out. And then once I know that it's working, then I'll shift over to the main branch and merge those changes from the branch that I've created. Okay, so I've opened the Unity editor. I'm using 2 monitors. My setup, at least for the time being, is 2 monitors. And on one monitor, I'll have the Unity editor, which you're seeing in the video. And then when I launch the Visual Basic or Visual Studio application, it usually sits in another window. So for this recording, just to make it, I guess, more user-friendly for viewing, I'll be dragging. Sometimes I'll be, expanding, maximizing that Visual Studio window to this one screen. Okay, so excuse the back and forth. This is my first time really recording myself, showing my process. But normally I'll be able to glance over here, see the code, and then over on the left, which you're seeing, I'll see the actual game itself. All right, so I'll open a random script here just to launch my Visual Studio. So let's pick a button scale. All right, so loading Visual Studio, and once again, I'll drag it over so you can take a look. This is just a random code, water current manager. These are different scripts that I have running on different game objects, and I'll get into that a little later. So for the time being, the way that I'm going to do this is talk about a problem that I'm trying to solve right now. And then when I go to the coding, I'll just open up Visual Studio, do the code, and then go back to the editor and test it. Okay? So right now the level is the demo level. That's what I've been kind of showing off for the last 6 months or so. And I'll play it, and I'll talk through what I would like to accomplish during this session. Okay, so
Starboard engine stop. Port engine stop. Rudder amidships.
And right now there's a speed monitor. So if I increase one of the engines, if I put
port engine ahead 1/3.
1/3 on the port side, you'll see that my speed starts increasing. And in this portion of the screen,
Port engine stop.
you'll see that there's some current affecting the ship here. It's offsetting to the pier, so it's pushing the ship on its pivot, the pivot point. So either way, the problem that I'm trying to solve right now is this speed monitor. I want this slip, the area that you're in on the piers, I want there to be a speed restriction. So if the player does excessive speed, I want some effect to take place. Whether it be maybe the screen, maybe there's a vignette that kind of shrinks the viewing area of the screen. Maybe the speed indicator starts lighting up to say, hey, your excess speed. Maybe there's a penalty, and I think that will come later, is whatever scoring system I plan on implementing, when the person does infractions, then it will take away points from the screen. But I like the idea right now of the vignette also shrinking the viewing area to kind of let you know, hey, something's clearly off. And, as we watch the ship get pushed off the pier and move towards the center here of the slip. And these yellow spheres, they're just for development. Every 10 seconds or so, one of these is dropped so that I can kind of monitor the ship's trajectory and kind of see what's happening with the physics. Okay, so yeah, let's get into this. So I want to start. I'm going to go into my 2D view in the viewport, and I'm going to zoom in on the actual UI. So here's the UI. You can see all the different layers. Some of these layers are instructions panels. Like if I selected the instructions panel, game controls, canvas element, which is just a 2D plane, right, where you can put different UI elements on, and I uncheck it, you can see that those instructions go away and so forth. And you can do that for all the different layers. So the thing that I want to interact with is that speed monitor. So under my level UI panel, I've got these different objects, and Unity works with game objects. And you can have empty game objects. Some game objects can have meshes. Some can just have a script on it that's there to monitor something that's happening in your game. Okay. So the level UI panel is the main panel that's holding all these controls and directions. So the speed display container, if I click on it, you'll see that, and I'm going to press the F key, and you'll see that it zooms in on this speed indicator. Right now I've got if I expand that speed display, there's a speed background. So there's a frame, that's that gradient transparent type graphic. That's the background, and then there's the text. So I have a placeholder before the game launches. It just says 0.0 knots. But in the Unity editor, I can change that to, let's say I had a speed. Now, it's false. It's just a placeholder. When the game actually starts, that speed text is tied to the rigid body of the actual player. And as that rigid body gains velocity or torque, drag even, then this text reflects the velocity. Okay, there's certain calculations that I'm doing, and then I know the actual velocity in meters per second, okay, that this object is going, and then it's just a conversion to knots. Okay, so I'll just return that to 0.0 knots. So I want to start here. This is going to drive, okay, when does this change to some different background? So maybe for now, for this lesson or this video, the source image, perhaps when the player reaches a certain speed, I can get that graphic to change and behave differently. Okay, maybe a material, maybe it can start scaling like a yo-yo effect to kind of get your attention to let you know that you're doing excess speed. Maybe I change the background frame to something else. So I've got lots of sprites, and I'll see if I have any useful ones in my collection. So right now I'm using that frame asset 22. That's the gradient. But perhaps I can use one of these. So you can see that that's altered how it looks slightly. Okay, so ideally I just want to change the color. So just to get the attention. Later on I'll make it something more visually appealing, but for now maybe I'll just have one of these other graphics pop in to show, hey, you're going past the speed limit in this slip. Okay? All right. So keeping with a good programming paradigm, I don't want the game objects, I want each game object to be pretty independent. I don't want them to rely on other game objects. So, if the other game object that you need an event to go off on isn't there, then I just want that game object to exist without having any errors. Okay, so I have, for this game in particular, I've used something called the event pattern, right? So essentially you have a control element, and it has events that are tied to it, and then it fires these events off. It raises the events. And then you have these listener objects that are outside of that main container. And the listener objects are waiting. They know the job that they have to do, but they have to wait for the signal to do their job. So essentially I plan on creating a middle person to keep track of these events, and then the speed monitor can tell that object, hey, we've now passed 2 knots, fire off an event. And if there's another object listening for that, it'll go, oh, the player's going in excess of 2 knots. So let's do what we were programmed to do. Okay, so Unity has these useful data containers that I really have started using in the last year or so, and I really love using them. They're called scriptable objects, and they're data containers. And they're different than the regular mono behavior. So if you're into Unity programming, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But for those of you who are watching just out of interest, there's a difference between mono behavior scripts and scriptable objects. So I'm going to create a script. And this script is going to be called my speed monitor. Get that mouse out the way. Speed monitor scriptable object. Okay, I've just created an empty script, and my Visual Studio opened for some reason, but there's my speed monitor SO. I'm going to double click on it, and that opens the script. I don't need the ship, so I just want to focus on this, and I'll try to zoom in here. Okay, so with a scriptable object, you see that it says mono behavior as what it's inheriting from. I want that to be a scriptable object. And scriptable objects don't have these functions associated with them. The mono behavior, you get the update function that runs every frame. You get the start function that executes a bit of code when the scriptable object, when the mono behavior first gets started. There are also other ones. There's like on enable, on awake, but we're not going to use any of these right now. And I say on, it should just be awake or on enable. But I don't need these because the scriptable object does not understand what those are. Okay, so since this object's going to be a middleman, I just need to have certain events associated with it. Get rid of these 2 includes because scriptable objects don't use them. But I do need to include the system library, because that's where I'm going to get all my C# events from. And one of the events that I need first is to say, let me create an event. And notice that my autocomplete, if you see that, it tried to do a Unity action, but I'm going to go with straight C# events. So I do event handler, and I want this event to be called on, and it's good practice to start events with the on. So when something happens, on enable, on on